Hello everyone and welcome back to another history lecture. I know it's been a while and I say this every time, but to give you some excuse, I'm going to give you some minor life updates. So I've been studying nonstop for 6 months for an incredibly important exam that I actually just finished taking in June, and it was simultaneously while I was still in school and still working part-time, so that absolutely virtually left no time for personal leisure, no time for reading, absolutely no time to think about a video essay or YouTube. So, and second, you can probably tell I'm in a different background. I'm actually not at home right now because I am in New York for the summer for a work opportunity that's been really amazing. So I think right now it's been very hectic in terms of change and new surroundings in my life, and I really absolutely have not had the time to just sit down and I think hold personal space to reflect on myself and what I think I want to do this summer. So I've had a lot on my mind. And I think ever since, another struggle I've been having is ever since these videos have been getting a little bit more directly personal with what I'm thinking and what I'm reading in general and how it's influencing my current train of thought. I feel like I'm now in this constant state of thinking that no matter how much I can read, it'll never be enough for a singular video. I feel it very hard to pick up something new and think, oh, I'm not done with planning this video essay yet because I have to finish reading this one so I can also add it to this topic because it pertains, and I need as many sources as I can, and I need to make it as credible and dense as I can, which I'm sure this is due to the additional factor of increased exposure, publicity, and criticism that my channel has been getting recently, especially on different online discourse spaces. But shifting, recently, another life update, I actually did my first ever public paid promotion on TikTok, and it was with a pretty well-known larger clothing brand in their vintage curatorial department. And in the moment, it felt very exciting and rewarding to me. They paid me a lot more money than I thought a singular video would compensate me for, especially on a platform that I upload on literally just for fun and what I regard as very little to no effort. And brands have reached out to me in the past regarding free clothing in exchange for an ad, but I usually don't say yes unless they're a very, very small business or their affronting message is that they ethically produce, hand make everything, they make everything themselves or with a very small close team. And avoiding buying retail has been a really huge ethos for the larger part of my life. The main thing I really wanted to talk about today was this book that I read called Going Shopping: Consumer Choices and Community Consequences by Anne Satterwhite. And she is a city planner who actually used to live in DC and very involved in environmental, cultural preservation planning in terms of how to improve your community livability, and talks a lot about how art emerges from community and vice versa. I thought it was interesting, a lot of people refer to her as the quote-unquote Jane Jacobs of shopping, who is also an incredible author. I have talked about her very expansively on my channel. I love her work, and I feel like this book really kind of landed in my lap at the perfect time. I kind of picked it up half out of curiosity and half out of guilt, as I myself, as much as I rep consumption culture, I also am an active participant in it. But I really enjoyed it. It's mainly about how much of our public life is used to be centered around these shared spaces, which is usually markets, little shops, places where you see neighbors catch up. And it's about how shopping isn't always historically about acquiring stuff. It's also a community activity, and it's a way to participate and socially engage with your town. And Anne says, quote, "Commerce and its accompanying prosperity were also recognized as essential ingredients in the welfare and growth of towns and villages, often to the horror of the Puritan leaders of the early colonies. Reconciling the needs of the community and the role of religion, these early colonies were able to forge a wily compromise that embraced capitalism and yet constrained it to the overriding ideals of building a better community for everyone." Like I said, I am currently staying in New York for the summer temporarily, and as much as I love seeing old friends and familiar faces, and it feels somewhat refreshing to be so immersed in such a dense saturation of youth and like younger people my age. A huge thing I notice whenever I'm here is that a big part of going out or having fun or participating in social spaces automatically implies that you're spending money. And I know that this applies everywhere, like this isn't just New York, but I think especially in New York, like the way New York's urban like geographic infrastructure is, it really lacks like natural landscape that isn't man-made, and it lacks like, for being so urban, it really lacks like these intervals of nature. So like even if you do decide to participate in like social activities outside the like urban metropole, like if you go to the park or like you just go to step outside without any thoughts to consume or buy anything, this is also a purely personal sentiment, so take this very lightly. I feel like this constant togetherness and constant like occupation of sensory activities while you're walking through the city means you're constantly bound to like encounter at least something favorable or entertaining in terms of buying. And like, because here everything is always running, everything is always open, it's always open for you to interact with and consume and buy. Especially since I've been here, I've noticed like the branded pop-ups that happen really frequently here every weekend, where people will wait in these incredibly long, like 4-hour lines for this brand that's trending online that like sells tank tops for like $300. So I think since I've been here and upon reading this book, I've really been thinking about what it means in terms of financial transaction and how that reflects into like implications of the social. I've been thinking a lot about what it means to buy something and consume, and how that lies in relation to my social spaces and my social relationships. But something that really reminded me of this was this one exhibition MoMA did in 2013 called The Exchange Cafe. This book was actually from a book that I read previously that I mentioned in my most recent video, and it was Wages Against Artwork. This project really stuck with me. I remember when I read it, which like feels especially relevant now to this topic, but it was created by Caroline Woolard as a part of the MoMA Department of Education's Artist Experiment Initiative back in 2013. And this wasn't like your typical museum cafe. Instead of paying for tea or milk or honey on the menu with money, the consumer, the quote consumer, or the participant would participate using a resource-based currency. So how it would work is they would trade skills or time or other resources, and the space was filled with this interactive archive of exchange-based art that people brought in exchange for their drink, and this huge library of books. And
we use what's called a community currency. It's a currency that circulates locally rather than nationally, as our federal dollars do. We call our community currency resources. For 3 resources, you can get milk, tea, and honey, and get 1 resource back in change. To validate the currency, you have to write 1 thing you demand or desire, and 1 thing you create or support. Money is not just a medium of exchange, but also, in this case, a means of sharing information between the people who use the currency, who participate in the economy. This seems obvious in a networked information age. By circulating the demands and desires of people who use the currency, we are imagining an economy where we can meet our needs together. We show that value is produced in many ways: on the street, between friends, in church or temple, and between people who are retired or in families. It may not be wage labor, it's valuable, right?
No, this is the whole point of the central design, was like to get people thinking about potential alternative economic models and what it means to build community through exchange and the barter economy as opposed to just consumption. And I think one of the most powerful parts about what MoMA did with this is how it brought together so many different local projects that helped reimagine what commerce could look like in New York at the time. And it was in very close collaboration, for example, with a nonprofit called Milk Not Jails, which still organizes both urban and rural New Yorkers affected by mass incarceration to create economic alternatives within the prison industry. And all of this is so interesting and so beautiful, especially I think the physical nature of it for me, because I think, currently, like, as opposed to the stark rise of e-commerce, which is so dominant in my life in your life, in our lives, because it makes shopping so easy and convenient. And like it really, this like rise of e-commerce has really shifted the power away from the sellers to the buyers in terms of the convenience of being able to choose. And I think that has really transformed the image of what it means to shop for yourself. And even though Anne's book is a little bit outdated, it was written in the late 90s or early 2000s, so much of her chapter on e-commerce like feels like a little bit of a time capsule, so I'm not sure her take on online shopping totally captures or applies now. But there is this one point that really stuck with me that she made, in which she says, quote, "The rise of shopping online actually induced a shift in gender roles and created a massive shift of power away from sellers to buyers. E-commerce shopping erases the stereotypical image of the serendipitous woman shopper. The modernity of it is a responsible maker relying on her brains." And it's so crazy to think about how this act of consuming has changed, not just in terms of technology, but also how it shapes our identities and, like Anne says, like what it means to define our agency in life. And with all these choices, it feels like we're not just buying products, it feels like we're buying into almost like these new modes of life, like these new modes of luxury and material abundance that was literally unfathomable a century ago. And in this sense, I think consuming has really become like this form of almost democratized luxury. And, you know, it's not just the ultra rich who have access to style and comfort, but it's been really open to the middle class and the middle ground as well. And historically, Anne notes, it's actually the middle class that has been the engine behind driving so much of what we call fashion. And this idea of the aspiration for social mobility has been like so deeply ingrained into what drives trends. Like she brings up Paris in the 19th century, these huge department stores in Paris were constantly, like in the 19th century, assessing people's hopes for better lives, like the middle class dream life, like, and responding to those dreams and the products that they put out. And you know, this is still happening today, like on a global digital scale. For instance, I watched this really interesting like Wall Street Journal video essay on the brand Abercrombie and Fitch, and it's such an interesting like video. You should really go watch it. It was talking about how Abercrombie was like once this huge like defining force of youth fashion. Like if you remember, like for me in middle school, like you would walk past Abercrombie and Fitch in the mall and there'd be like this really hot like shirtless dude in his 20s who was a model, just like paid to stand outside of it, because the whole thing was like, if you shop here, you're hot, like you got it. And it was like, its whole branding was very exclusive, logo heavy. But by the 2010s, it kind of really sloped off. Like it had its moment where like the middle schoolers kind of fell for it, but like, you know, by the 2010s, its sales were really down, and its competitors like H&M and Zara that were much cheaper were able to produce so much faster, plus the rise of online shopping were just like eating at it, and it was really doing horrible. So what they did in 2017 is they brought in Fran Horowitz, who became the CEO in 2017, and she completely changed like their marketing strategy. So instead of chasing teens or like trying to be like this luxury brand, they specifically started targeting the middle class female demographic. Specifically, more importantly to note, the young millennial. And this is like women in their late 20s to 40s, like kind of midway through their career, has a little bit of a disposable income. And this is like a group that Fran noticed was completely ignored by both high fashion and fast fashion. But this was a demographic that had spending power and still wanted style to feel modern and accessible. And it worked. Like they started changing their style and clothing to notice what this specific age demographic wanted, not something that was like super young or super old. And they did a lot of like consumer surveys, and a lot of millennial and Gen Z women report it like seeing it as a hit and very good value and stylish brand that they look to. So I think on this topic and conversation of consumption, it's not always just about buying stuff, it's also about how these brands can negotiate the consumer's identity and status, and like reinforce like belonging, the sense of belonging as you consume. And you know, the age-old question you keep coming back to when you are shopping for yourself is am I really choosing as a consumer, or am I just being offered a more sophisticated illusion of choice that this brand is offering? How do you as an individual find ways to consume that empower you, pushing for something more and something like looking for something to consume that feels genuinely yours? And this quote, a little bit dramatic, if you will, excuse me, but I think it's a really cool. It's from Voltaire's Bastards, and it's by John Ralston Saul. And now the death of God combined with the perfection of the image has brought us to a whole new state of expectation. We are the image. We are the viewer and the viewed. There is no other distracting presence. And that image has all the godly powers. It kills at will, kills effortlessly, kills beauty. It dispenses morality, judges endlessly. The electronic image is man as God, and the ritual involved leads us not to a mysterious Holy Trinity, but back to ourselves. In the absence of a clear understanding that we are now the only source, these images cannot help but return to the expression of magic and fear proper to idolatrous societies. This in turn facilitates the use of the electronic image as propaganda by whoever can control some part of it. And, you know, if we do take Saul's words seriously, I think that we are both, as a consumer, the viewer and the viewed. It's no wonder that you see all these tools and these startups and this technology constantly evolving, changing or influencing our methods of consumption, because it is so central to who you are. And this is a recent, and not more so recent, but like has been gaining more traction in terms of like this buy now pay later system that's been very popular. You have never shopped online before and you've never seen like the, you know, pay this now and then like pay this later, like the little purple button when you buy something online. Klarna is a global fintech company that is, I believe, Swedish. I'm gonna look this up actually. Yes, I was right. It's from Sweden, and it is by far Sweden's like biggest, most renowned, prominent startup. And there's actually, it gives you various options apparently. I've never used it. So you can either, one, pay in 4, so you can split your purchase into 4 interest-free payments with 25% down and the rest paid every 2 weeks. Or you can pay in 30 days, so you can get your item now and then pay the full amount at once in a 30-day time frame with absolutely no interest. Or your last option, you can pick monthly financing, in which you can spread the payment for the item over 3 to 36 months. And this one does have interest. It can come with rates as high as almost 35.99% APR. And it's really interesting to see how it works and how it's like fits so seamlessly into almost every online transactional online shopping platform you can use. It's literally built like right into the checkout process at thousands of retailers. And Klarna, what they do is they pay the retailer up front. And what you do as a consumer is, if you really want this now, even though you don't need it, if you really want this now but you can't afford it in full right now, Klarna has your back. Klarna has your back, and all you have to do is pay them back later with no interest, like as if you're paying a friend back. And it's made this idea of borrowing money so easy that it barely registers as like debt conceptually at all, because you're not applying for a credit card, like you're literally just clicking a button. And because there's no interest on these 2 short-term options, it feels so harmless. Like it feels almost responsible. It actually goes to show that Klarna's own data shows that people spend up to 55% more than they need to when they use buy now pay later options. And especially for Gen Z and millennials who are already carrying like socially so much debt in terms of student loans, stagnating wages, and like an incredibly impossible job market right now. This kind of like invisible debt obviously can add up really, really fast. And the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau actually found that BNPL, buy now pay later purchases now make up a third of total consumer debt for people aged 18 to 24. And apparently, I mean, this is also from personal experience of friends who use this, and I'm not shunning anyone for using it. Like, this isn't like a judgment call or anything. I'm also a shameless consumer. It's not unusual for someone to have multiple Klarna or Afterpay or Affirm loans running at a time. And I think what makes Klarna's financial model so successful, especially with the youth, is that it really feeds into this current schema and culture of instant gratification as we are living in this current age of constant convenience. At least maybe this is selection bias, but like with the people that I see using these forms of, interest-free borrowing, they're not buying things that they need. They're buying clothing or like commodities that help them perform a certain identity or project a certain image, or just like keep up with this constant endless churn of online trends that you see in terms of style and fashion. And I also recently read this really interesting essay and this really interesting book that I actually haven't gotten too far into, hence my message in the beginning about I feel like I constantly need to read like new things and like keep adding into this video essay, but I think this one actually did apply, and I'm currently reading this book called Money Lab Reader 2, Overcoming the Hype. It's about like this collective of artists, I believe they're based in Amsterdam, like somewhere in the Netherlands, about like interpreting art in terms of like the decentralization methods that are happening in finance. But this essay, it's called Optimist Realism, Finance and the Politicization of Anticipation by Patricia Reed. So basically, Reed is arguing that contemporary finance is defined by its ability to operationalize on the future. And like through derivatives and similar financial instruments such as Klarna, she describes like this method of finance as markets placing a price on events that have not yet happened. Because obviously, like, the whole idea of investing is that you're betting on a possible future. But what she says is, like, this very act of anticipating a future outcome transforms, like, the present. And she says, quote, "It is the very enactment reduced to mere gambling of forced anticipation that transforms the present as well, because anticipation imposes constraints / enablers on existing current possibilities." She notes like this idea, it's a little bit, I know obviously investing, like this is a very basic, universally understood concept in finance, but she gets very theoretical with this idea of using anticipation as like this tool for power. And she says, quote, she describes it as, quote, "this reorganized temporality of our political economy." And I think her whole point is that, I guess, anticipation itself has become too politicized in a sense. And despite it being so monopolized by such a few amount of people, it, like, the effects that it has on this power of being able to control anticipation shapes everything socially and culturally in the current. And, traditionally this idea of debt, even though I will bring into later it's not always financial, debt has always been associated with interest, risk, and a very clear-cut cost for borrowing against the future. I think it's so interesting that, like, Klarna it's so successful because it has completely disarrayed this basic concept of anticipation being held by only a few. Its interest-free, very short-term options kind of almost, like, really neutralize this anxiety that makes, like, this idea of being in financial debt to this company feel very frictionless and very benign. Going back to the numbers, Klarna's own data shows that there is like a 17% increase in credit losses year over year of their consumer database, and surveys do show that a growing number of users year and year after they've gained more popularity have been struggling to repay even like the smallest interest-free loans. And going back to Reed, like this idea she describes of the politicization of anticipation, the politicization of what it really means to be in debt, is really reflected in this one artist that I really found that I really liked, named Christine Sen. And since I am actually in New York, I recently got the chance to see her exhibition, currently being shown at the Whitney. If you haven't seen it yet, it's really incredible. I really recommend you go see it. And she really shows it throughout some of her pieces that I'll explain. She really talks about how deeply the structures of debt are kind of reverberated through our everyday lives, and not only shaping like our financial capabilities, but also our sense of agency and belonging and access And most importantly, Kim is a deaf artist, so she takes like kind of the abstraction of debt and makes it very tangible in terms of how she interprets it as someone who like cannot traditionally like audibly hear. And her practice often spans videos and drawings and sculptures, a lot of it contingent upon the themes of her usage of ASL and how it being her main medium of using it to communicate with only certain people who understand ASL has really shaped and changed her understanding of how she interacts with things. And there's this one specific piece that I saw that really stood out to me, and it's called How Do You Hold Your Debt? And she uses these variations of ASL sign language for the word debt, and in it you can see that she plants a forefinger in the center of the palm to like kind of visualize the nuance of being owed and to owe. How she describes it in this interview is how she understands debt as a deaf person. And she says, quote, in an interview with the Brooklyn Rail, the sign in American Sign Language for debt and owe are very similar to what you would use with body language to communicate, like pay up or you owe me. We've seen this in films, like I'm waiting for that money to be put in my palm, but then you modify the sign with your facial expressions. So how severe is a debt? How much does this person owe you, or how long has this person owed you? Or is it in fact affordable with a positive facial expression? And with this, obviously, I have to bring it up in this video essay. Also, I love Graeber's work. I read this a very long time ago. I reread it again recently because I feel like it's very tangible now. I couldn't help but think of David Graeber's Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And in this book, he has this quote that I always come back to time and time again and just find it very crucial. Quote, the value of a unit of currency is not the measure of the value of an object, but the measure of one's trust in other human beings. And that sharing, whether it's music, food, or even gossip, is at the core of what makes life pleasurable and meaningful. Our modern financial systems have turned these nuanced moral obligations into cold, impersonal debts that can be quantified, transferred, and abstracted away from people and relationships that once gave them meaning. This book is so incredibly long. It takes a very long time to get through it, but I do recommend you read it. But his entire thing, I'm gonna try to sum it up, is like, he argues that reducing social obligations to debts to make them financially quantifiable and enforceable totally strips away the personal and relational aspects of human interaction. So Christine Sun Kim says in the same interview, quote, to me, future is setting oneself up to expect to receive something, like information, but that thing might not come. And so you spend time waiting, and when it arrives, it feels different compared to those who received it in real time. And that connects to debt. For example, I am owed the information, but I might get less of it, and if I get less, then I am in information debt. In a sense, this is also a commentary on access to resources, which is a conversation that I've been having a lot recently. And going back to her piece, How to Hold Her Debt, you can see that she really, focuses on the nuances for the sign of debt and how the direction of the palm or the force of the finger you use when you are signaling the word debt and the accompanying facial expressions really indicate the idea of who owes who. A book I also finished reading recently, which was really good. It was a little bit shorter. It was, I think, a little bit more dense in terms of theory, and I'm not sure I, on the first read, fully really grasped what he was trying to say. But from what I understood, I recently read The X Form by the infamous Nicolas Bourriaud. I think in the larger context of consumerism and debt, it really suggests that our economic and social systems are not just rational structures, but also very deeply unconscious ones. And another really interesting thing he notes, his central argument in the X Form is that, or what I understood to be his centralizing argument, I think I need to reread it to be honest, but he says that the artist's main job is to create something that mediates the subjects of product and waste. So in a world defined by constant production and consumption, he really sees art as occupying a very unique space in being able to reveal what is cast aside or what is forgotten or what is rendered invisible by the logic of capitalism. And he really kind of finishes this book off by saying that the artist, in this sense, should always hold this imperative objective to draw attention to what is excluded or devalued and open up these new possibilities for this kind of gray area of what is not product but what is not waste. Even in a consumerist society, language in itself can become commodified, and those who don't speak, like the dominant codes, whether linguistically, economically, or culturally, risk this possibility of being rendered as invisible. Christine Sun Kim's art is really about how it's describing this process of this debt that she is owed in terms of information or social interaction just because she isn't able to participate in the main mode of communication or language, and not everyone knows how to sign ASL. All this to say, I am not putting myself in a position to say that I am not also at fault for participating in such forms and perpetuating these systems as a consumer myself. I think the truth is, as you can see with Bourriaud and Christine Sun Kim and all these writers I referenced, but I think moving from this, I think what matters is, rather than like really attempting to completely disengage from it, because that's kind of technically impossible, I think it's more so being able to cultivate awareness through these artists' work, like the MoMA Exchange Cafe or Christine Sun Kim's work, that there are these systems that exist that not only define what we buy, but also define how we understand terms of obligation and value and even ourselves. And this is actually, now that I'm kind of verbalizing it as I record this, I realize this is a larger goal for myself this summer, living in this very consumption-centric urban metropole of a city. I think I'm really going to seek and try to engage in spaces and conversations and people in which financial transaction or consumption is not the core medium of our interaction. I know this video was a little bit very out of place, and I'm sorry if some of the connections I drew seemed like a little bit of a far stretch. I really did try very hard to fit everything that I've been reading and consuming media-wise into one video, and sometimes it's hard to fit it all in. I actually had to leave a lot out. But with that being said, I do also get into all the museums for free this summer because of my work, so I am definitely going to be taking advantage of that, and I'm going to be putting myself in positions to feel inspired and be urged to read and want to inform myself further in these environments and these places that I'm consciously taking up space in. That being said, I hope you learned something from this. I hope you took away from it. I hope it inspired you this summer to participate more socially without the aspect of consumerism with your friends or your loved ones or the places that you also take up space in. So, that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next art history lecture. Bye.